Cane toads are on the march, sweeping across northern Australia into the wilds of the Kimberley.
A cane toad nicknamed Toadzilla has been discovered in Queensland's far north.
It's been disastrous for local wildlife, but local rangers are taking on the toads with the help of science.
Australia used a tiny predator to fight an invasion, and what happened next was not in anyone's plan. For almost 100 years, a 5-pound poison-soaked monster has been winning a war against an entire continent, killing crocodiles, dingoes, and lizards in the time it takes to swallow.
These toads are actually evolved longer legs. They're bigger toads, they're stronger, they're faster, and they just continuously are heading west.
Then something the size of a grain of rice walked up to it in broad daylight and changed the rules. The numbers coming out of the Kimberley right now are so brutal that researchers had to film it to prove it was real. And the part nobody saw coming is what the toads are doing back. A nation under siege. Back in 1935, somebody had a really bad idea that ended up changing an entire country forever. They brought 102 cane toads over from Hawaii to Queensland because they thought these giant frogs would clean up the beetles ruining the sugarcane crops. But here's the catch. The beetles lived high up on the stalks, and the toads stayed down on the ground. The toads never touched the beetles. They started taking over everything else. These things are not your average pond frogs. They are massive, sometimes weighing over 5 pounds, with skin that is literally leaking poison. The poison is a milky white slime called bufatoxin.
They contain the deadly bufatoxin in their skin, and any of our native animals that go and eat one of these toads will pretty much die.
And it sits hidden inside 2 big bumps right behind the shoulders. Here is what nobody is saying clearly enough. That slime is powerful enough to stop the heart of a saltwater crocodile or a full-grown dingo in under 15 minutes. Because nothing in Australia grew up around these toads, the local animals had no defense, no instinct, no warning signs in their DNA. A hungry goanna would see a slow, fat toad and think it just won the lottery. One bite and it was over. Quolls, freshwater crocs, monitor lizards, snakes, dingoes. They all started dying off in numbers so brutal that researchers stopped counting individuals and started counting entire populations as gone. These toads are basically a biological disaster that just keeps moving. Every year, the front line of the invasion pushes forward by another 25 to 37 miles. Right now, there are more than 200 million of them spreading across over 580,000 square miles of the country. They have already burned through Queensland, the Northern Territory, and they are pushing hard into Western Australia. People tried everything. They built traps, they sprayed chemicals. They even held community events where everyone would head out at night to grab as many toads as they could. One of those events was called Toad Day Out.
Remember the last time that you ate something that you thought looked a bit dodgy, but you ate it anyway, and then you were sick, and then you never ate that again?
And thousands of toads were collected in a single night. But honestly, it was like trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon. Each female lays up to 30,000 eggs at a time. We were never going to win. And then researchers noticed something tiny moving through the grass at the edge of the breeding ponds, something the experts had been stepping over for almost a century. The tiny killer. What they were watching was the meat ant. Native Australian ants known for being savagely aggressive, living in massive colonies that can hold hundreds of thousands of workers. They are called meat ants because they have a reputation for picking carcasses clean in the time it takes you to make a cup of coffee. Now, here is the wild part. While almost every other animal in Australia is terrified of cane toad poison, the meat ant could not care less. This is the detail that sent Rick Shine and his team at the University of Sydney down a rabbit hole they could not climb back out of. The poison the toads carry is designed to attack the hearts and the nervous systems of vertebrates, things with backbones, birds, snakes, mammals. But ants are invertebrates. Their bodies are wired completely differently. To a meat ant, a cane toad is not a toxic monster at all. It is just a big, slow pile of protein. If you are still with me, do me a quick favor and hit that subscribe button before we go any further. Because what comes next is the part that completely changes how you see the food chain. Here is what nobody is saying out loud. Meat ants are most active during the day, which just so happens to be the exact same time the baby toads, the toadlets, come crawling out of the water in waves. When a baby toad first leaves a pond, it is only about the size of a marble. At that stage, they are stupidly vulnerable, scrambling around in the open, trying to find shade before the sun cooks them. That is the moment the ants are waiting for. When a single meat ant finds a toadlet, it does not bite once and walk away. It releases a chemical signal. Within seconds, the air fills with pheromone, and the rest of the colony comes pouring out of the ground like a black tide. Now, here is where it gets disturbing. The toad's natural defense, the one that has worked for it everywhere else, is to freeze. Sit perfectly still. Trust the poison. But Rick Shine watched something happen at that pond edge that made him put down his camera and just stare. A tin of cat food. The ants do not eat the toad whole, they take it apart. The first wave swarms the toadlet's flanks and locks their mandibles into the soft skin behind the front legs, the spot where the bufatoxin glands have not fully developed yet. While that wave anchors the toad in place, a second wave climbs up over the back and goes straight for the eyes. Within 20 seconds, the toad cannot see, cannot move, and is being chemically marked from the inside out so every other ant in a 30-foot radius knows exactly where the meal is. The third wave starts harvesting. What you have to understand is that this is not random violence. It is coordinated logistics. The first ants you see are scouts, and they are not the ones doing the killing. They are drawing the map. As soon as the scout hits the toad, she turns around and runs a dragline of pheromones straight back to the nest entrance. Within minutes, that single dragline has been reinforced into a highway.
We've got lots of native lizards and snakes, but also a lot of the local community walk their dogs through the gardens here as well, and toads can be fatal to all of those animals.
And the colony switches from foraging mode to hunting mode. The workers coming up the highway are bigger, older, and built for combat. Picture this: a creature that just spent 6 weeks growing inside a pond that crawls out into open air for the first time in its life, expecting to live for 15 years and grow to the size of a dinner plate. And instead, it gets disassembled by an organism it cannot even comprehend, in roughly the time it takes to read this sentence out loud. Here is the part that broke the researchers. The toad does not run. It cannot. The pheromone trail tells every ant in the colony exactly where to go, and the ants moving in are faster than the toad's nervous system can process. By the time the toadlet realizes sitting still is the wrong call, ants are already inside its mouth, between its toes, under its eyelids. Even if it does try to hop, it makes it maybe a body length before the second swarm catches it. The team filmed one toadlet that managed 3 short hops before going down. 3 hops. That was its entire life on land. A single colony can clear dozens of toadlets in a single afternoon without breaking what passes for a sweat in the ant world. This is where Rick Shine and Georgia Ward Fear got an idea that should not have worked. They figured if the ants were already doing this naturally, what would happen if they just gave the ants a reason to show up in bigger numbers? So they started running experiments along the breeding ponds in the Kimberley. Their lure was almost embarrassingly simple: bits of meat, dog food, canned cat food, dropped right along the shoreline. The ant population at those baited sites jumped to more than 4 times the normal density. And then the numbers came in. 98% of the toadlets emerging from those ponds were located by ants within 2 minutes of leaving the water. 84% were attacked on the spot. Over half of the toadlets died right there at the pond edge, on camera, in front of the team. But here is what wrecked their initial estimates. Even the ones that escaped did not make it. Almost 90% of the survivors were dead within 24 hours, either from open wounds, infection, or heat stress because they were too injured to find shade. You spend 100 years failing to stop an invasion. And then a tin of cat food does what helicopters and pesticides could not. Here is the part that nobody talks about. This method does not hurt anything else. Native Australian frogs have been living next to meat ants for thousands of years. They already know exactly how to avoid them. Native frogs are mostly active at night when the ants are inside the nest. They are also faster, smaller, and far better at hiding in vegetation. The cane toad is the only species in this entire ecosystem stupid enough to walk straight into the ants in broad daylight and then sit still. Every other frog on the continent learned the rules during the Pleistocene. The cane toad never got the memo. So, what Rick Shine's team built is not really a weapon. It is more like a filter. The cat food just turns the volume up on something the outback was already doing on its own. But there is something else happening at those pond edges that the team did not expect to see, something they are only just starting to understand.
After a night of hard work, the Botanic Gardens is one step closer to being totally free.
The turn nobody saw. Here is what the field team noticed in their second year of trials. The ant colonies near baited sites were not just bigger, they were behaving differently. Workers that normally forage in narrow trails were spreading out into wider patrol patterns along the shorelines. Scouts were climbing up onto rocks and low vegetation that they would normally ignore, and the response time to a single scout's pheromone signal had dropped by nearly half compared to colonies the team measured 5 years earlier. The ants were learning the rhythm of the toadlet emergence. They were positioning themselves in advance. Nobody told them to do that. Nobody trained them. They figured it out. Then came the part that genuinely surprised the researchers. Some of the larger toads, the adults that had survived the toadlet stage, started showing avoidance behavior the team had never documented before. Adult cane toads were actively going around active ant nests instead of hopping over them. This is a species that, until very recently, had no fear of anything in Australia. Now, it is rerouting around a creature 1,000 times smaller than itself. Georgia Ward. Fear watched one big adult, easily 3 pounds, freeze mid-hop within sight of a meat ant trail and back up. She wrote the word deliberate in her field notes and underlined it twice. Here is what nobody is saying. The toads are learning, the ants are dangerous. And the ants are learning, the toadlets are reliable. That is not how a one-sided invasion is supposed to look. That is what you call a real predator-prey relationship clicking into place. The same kind that took millions of years to form between native species. Except, this one is forming in real time, on a continent that was supposed to be defenseless, between two animals that did not even share a hemisphere 100 years ago. The brutal truth is that we are probably never getting rid of the cane toad. With over 200 million already in the wild, full eradication is fantasy. But the toad's exponential expansion across the north has measurably slowed in regions where the meat ant program has been running, and at certain pond systems in the Kimberley, the entire annual class of toadlets has been wiped out 3 years in a row. That is not a dent. That is a population control loop. The front line of this war is not in a lab. It is in the dirt between two species, with a researcher kneeling next to it, scribbling everything down before it gets away. So here's the question I want you to sit with. Are we watching the outback heal itself, finally finding a balance against an invasion we caused? Or are we watching something stranger, something we do not have a name for yet, where a continent under siege starts assembling its own defense system out of the smallest pieces it has left? Drop your theory in the comments below, because I genuinely want to know which side you land on. And before you go, tap that subscribe button so you do not miss the next investigation. The next video gets into another invasive species that took over an entire ecosystem. And what is happening with that one might be even more disturbing than the toads.